For much of recorded history, the broad expanse of land in the Great Eurasian Steppes was home to vast majorities of nomadic tribes. From the 10th century to the mid-13th century, the western steppes were dominated by the Cuman-Kipchak Confederation, which was composed of various Turkic nomadic tribes, predominantly the Cumans and the Kipchaks. At the height of their power, they actively influenced mighty kingdoms and empires, such as the Byzantine Empire, the Kingdom of Hungary, the Bulgarian Empire, Kievan Rus, the Kingdom of Georgia, and the Kwarezmian Empire, among others. But who were these nomadic Horselords, and where did they come from? The Cumans and Kipchaks were two different tribes of Turkic origins that came from northeastern Asia. They began spreading westwards from the East Asian steppes from 800 AD onwards. At that time, they ruled over a large expanse of land north of the Caspian and Ural Sea, around northern Kazakhstan and southern Siberia. It is unknown whether the Cumans subjugated the Kipchaks or simply joined forces with them and created the Confederacy. However, by the early 11th century AD, they moved further west into the region around the southern end of the Russian steppes and the lands lying to the north of the Black Sea. Although the Cumans and the Kipchaks are closely related, they did have some tribal variations. It is unclear what the word Cuman refers to, but in the Turkic languages, it means pale, sallow, or cream-colored. Because of this, many scholars have suggested that the Cumans may have had a genetic trait that resulted in an above-average instance of pale, blonde, or light-colored hair amongst their people. Others deny this theory and suggest that the name might refer to their horses being of particular paler colors. The appearance of the Cumans and Kipchaks was quite traditional for steppe cultures. Both men and women had braided hairstyles. Their clothes were Turkic in style, with men wearing a kaftan tunic or robe tightened with belts, and women wearing something similar, albeit of a different cut and shape. In addition, they wore conical letter hats of different variations depending on their rank. When they went to war or in raiding expeditions, the Cumans fought primarily on horseback and preferred light armor and the use of recurved and later the composite bow and arrows, a fighting style that made them highly mobile and swift. Like all nomadic people, they used the famed hit-and-run tactic, using fast surprise attacks, withdrawing before the enemy could respond, and constantly maneuvering to avoid full engagement until the enemy was weakened and tired by the constant array of arrows and javelins. Then, they charged fiercely and attacked the enemy using sabers and sometimes maces, while also using heavy spears for lancing. Although the Cuman warriors were predominantly light-armored, there are many archaeological discoveries of the famed Cuman face-masked helmets found in burial sites, together with mail and lamellar armor. The masked helmets of the Cumans were very distinguishing and had many details on them, precisely the depiction of mustaches. Masked helmets and mail armor were probably used by the upper class of the Cuman-Kipchak society, khans, chiefs, mercenary commanders, and renowned warriors. Cuman society was structured around kinship, where families were organized into clans led by a chief, which in turn were organized into tribes led by khans. Blood oaths and lineage were central to the Cumans, and the punishments for theft or any other more serious crime were very severe. Their society was also heavily centered on horses, which were the basis of everything from their military to their nomadic lifestyle. The Cumans generally engaged in pastoral rather than agricultural farming, and had large herds of sheep, goats, and camels. However, their primary source of income came from raiding and selling slaves. In the mid-11th century, the Cumans expanded further to the west, conquering the tribes left after the collapse of the Khazar Khaganate, pushing the Uz tribe southeast, and dispersing the Pechenegs west of the Dnieper River. The Rus primary chronicle mentions Yemenic Cumans who were going into raiding expeditions in the lands of the Volga Bulgars. And in 1061, the Cumans under the chieftain Sokol launched devastating raids in the Rus Principality of Pereyaslav, which started a war with the Rus that lasted for almost 200 years. Then, in 1068, at the Battle of the Alta River, the Cuman-Kipchaks, led by Khan Shahrukh, defeated the armies of the three sons of Jaroslav the Wise, Grand Prince Izyaslav I of Kiev, Prince Vsevolod of Pereyaslav, and Prince Sviatoslav of Chernigov. After this great victory, they fiercely raided the Rus principalities, devastating the land and taking captives, who became either their slaves or were sold at markets in the south. The Cumans gained great fame for their battle skills, and the Byzantine Emperor Romanus hired Cumans and Pechenegs as mercenaries in his army against the Seljuks led by Sultan Alp Arslan. However, at some point during the war, the Cumans and Pechenegs did not receive payments from the Byzantines, so they eventually defected to the Seljuks and even participated in the famous Battle of Manzikert on the side of the Seljuks, which forever changed the fate of Anatolia. After the defeat at Manzikert, the weakened Byzantine state became a target for massive raids from the Pechenegs, who allied with the Cumans. 40,000 Cumans were led by the two commanders, Turkic and Banyak, who were experienced in raiding the lands of Kievan Rus. Joining their new Pecheneg allies, they launched massive raids on the Balkan provinces and even went as far as Adrianople. They amassed a massive treasure from these raids, but the two tribes disagreed about the loot distribution, which resulted in a serious breach between them. This was used by the skilled Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, who allied with the Cuman commanders. On April 29, 1091, around 80,000 Pechenegs were almost completely obliterated in the Battle of Lavalian by a force of 25,000, led by Alexios Komnenos and the 40,000 Cumans. The Pechenegs could never recover from this crushing defeat, and 3 years later, in 1094, they were entirely dispersed by the Cumans, with all that remained of the Pechenegs fleeing and getting incorporated by the Kingdom of Hungary, a fate that will follow the Cumans 200 years later. The raids of the Cuman-Kipchak Confederacy were not limited only to their neighbors. In fact, they extended even as far as the Kingdom of Hungary, the Kingdom of Poland, and the northern cities located in Lithuania. Often large numbers of slaves were taken, or tributes were demanded to stop further depredations. In 1185, the Cumans played a vital part in the Bulgarian uprising led by Asen and Petar, which led to the establishment of the Second Bulgarian Empire. In the years that followed, the Asen dynasty of Bulgaria kept close relations with the Cumans. In fact, Tsar Chaliand was married to a Cuman princess by the name of Anna, a marriage that will play a vital role in the developments after the Fourth Crusade. When the Crusaders sacked Constantinople in 1204 and established the Latin Empire, they changed their focus to the lands of Bulgaria. In 1205, the proud and undefeated Latin Knights, led by their Emperor Baldwin I and his Venetian allies under Doge Enrico Dandolo, besieged the city of Adrianople, which pledged loyalty to the Bulgarians. During the siege, Cuman horse archers sent by Tsar Chaliand started to harass the Latin Knights. When the Latin Knights charged, the light-armored Cumans fell back. Eventually, the proud knights couldn't stand this harassment and gave chase to the Cumans, trailing them for almost 9 kilometers. Little did they know that the Cumans were leading them to a trap. Suddenly, the Latin knights realized they were surrounded by the Bulgarian infantry. The Cumans turned, and the entire force of Tsar Chaliand descended upon the knights, completely slaughtering them. Chaliand captured Emperor Baldwin, and the Cuman allies were gifted a large part of the Latin treasures. The Catholic world was shocked by the defeat of the invincible Latin army, a defeat that crippled the newly found Latin Empire and consequentially changed the fate of Europe. Once again, the Cuman-Kipchaks played a vital role in the fate of Europe and beyond. While all these events were unfolding in the western part of the Cuman-Kipchak Confederacy, the eastern part, predominantly composed of Kipchak tribes, did not stand idle throughout the years. For example, some of the Kipchak tribes served as mercenaries for the Ghaznavids, while others invaded and raided them. A few decades later, in 1118, the King of Georgia, David IV, also known as David the Builder, traveled to the lands of the Cuman-Kipchaks with a large delegation of high-ranking Georgian nobles. He asked for an alliance with Khan Otrop, a Cuman chieftain who raided the Rus but was eventually defeated. The alliance was struck, and King David married the daughter of the Khan, Princess Garandik. Khan Otrop, together with 40,000 Cumans, settled in Georgia and became part of the nobility in the country. This was all part of the military reforms undertaken by King David to repel the Seljuk Turks, who were threatening his kingdom. The Cuman warriors were placed in the Seljuk frontiers, and the Georgian land was properly defended. The plan of King David worked even better than he expected, as Georgia managed to expand drastically, eventually conquering Shirvan and becoming the most powerful state in the Caucasian region. This led to a golden age in Georgian history, which lasted until the 13th century until the arrival of the Mongols. Although the Cumans drastically increased the military capabilities of Georgia, they also created many problems for them. They revolted many times against David, and many Cumans were slaughtered while others were resettled in Armenian lands. A large part of the Cumans were actually Christianized and eventually adopted the Georgian culture. As you've probably assumed, the Cuman-Kipchaks generally practiced the shamanic religion known as Tengriism. This is an ancient religion practiced by the broad mass of Turkic and Mongol people from the Asian steppe. It is mainly centered on the sky god Tengri, who is associated with heaven. Accordingly, it is primarily a monotheistic religion. The Cuman-Kipchaks largely maintained this faith throughout the period of 800 AD to the end of the Confederacy at around 1250 AD, although there were many cases of Islamization and Christianization of the population. Moreover, there were two different strands of Christianity to which the Cuman-Kipchaks were exposed. From the Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire, they absorbed the Greek Orthodox faith, while missionaries from further west in Poland, Hungary, and Germany preached the Roman Catholic faith. Thus, many of the Cumans at the western end of the Confederacy were converting by the early 13th century. The Roman Catholic Church was very eager to convert the Cuman-Kipchak. In fact, at some point during the 13th century, a dictionary for the Turkic language of the Cuman-Kipchaks was composed by the Europeans. It was called Codex Cumanicus and was predominantly used by German missionaries who were trying to convert Cumans, together with the Genoan merchants in the region, who had a trading colony there. The Catholic missionaries had some success, like the mass baptism of Cumans in Moldavia, carried by Robert the Archbishop of Esztergom in Hungary. Ultimately, the Cuman-Kipchak Confederacy met the same demise as many other nations did with the rise of the Mongol Empire, which stretched through large parts of Asia and Europe. The Mongols first encountered the Cuman-Kipchaks when they started their war with the Kwarezmian Empire. At this time, the Kipchak tribes were intermarrying with the Kwarezmians and were serving as mercenaries, who were put in garrison duties in the northern cities. An example of this is the city of Samarkand, which was defended by Kipchak mercenaries when the Mongols destroyed it. Realizing the threat the Mongol hordes posed, The Cuman-Kipchaks sent many offers for a coalition to the Rus princes, but they constantly rejected them. After the conquest of the Kwarezmian Empire, the Mongols led by Subutai and Jebe crossed the Caucasus Mountains. There, they were met by a coalition of Volga Bulgars, Alans, and Cuman-Kipchaks, numbering around 50,000. The Mongols couldn't overcome this force, so they bribed the Kipchaks, assuring them that they would be left alone as they were fellow nomads, so the Cumans left the Bulgars and Alans to get slaughtered. Then, the Mongols chased down and killed the Cuman-Kipchaks, who were slowed down by the treasures they were carrying. The Mongols raided everything in the region with no mercy. The Kievan Rus princes, who now saw that the Mongol threat was real and was closing in on them, finally agreed to a coalition with the Cuman-Kipchak Confederacy, led by Khan Kutin. A council of war was arranged in Kiev by Mstislav III, which was attended by Prince Yuri II of Vladimir Suzdal and Mstislav Sviatoslavik of Chernigov. The princes allied with Khan Kutin's Cumans and formed a massive army of 80,000, with which they attacked the 20,000-strong army of the Mongols. The Mongols suffered some casualties but managed to flee. Mstislav of Kiev was advising caution, but the Cuman-Kipchaks were eager to chase down the Mongols and kill them. However, the retreat of the Mongols was a trap, and after 9 days of chasing, the forces of the coalition were separated, with the Cumans being in the front and the Rus forces lagging behind. Unexpectedly, Subutai ordered a full charge, and the Cuman-Kipchak forces were crushed and fled the battle. The unorganized Rus forces that followed were also destroyed. In the years, a second Mongol invasion began, and causing a massive migration of Cumans in all directions. Some Cumans fled to Volga Bulgaria before it was also conquered by the Mongols. Others fled to Anatolia, while a large number of Cumans crossed the Danube River and settled in Hungary and Bulgaria. Although the Cuman-Kipchak Confederacy ceased to exist, the Cumans continued to influence the history of the known world. The Cumans who settled in Hungary and Bulgaria quickly Christianized, integrated, and even joined the aristocracy. And not just that, in 1281, after many years of political crisis, the Bulgarian Empire elected a noble of Cuman origins as their Tsar. His name was Georgi Terter, and his dynasty Terter was most likely the Bulgarianized Terter-Roba clan of the Cumans, which ruled the Confederacy for many years. It had been claimed that Khan Kutin, who fought the Mongols, also belongs to the Terter-Roba. Many Cuman-Kipchaks were sold as slaves by the Mongols and went to Egypt, where they were used as slave warriors, which eventually took power and formed the Mamluk Sultanate. This same Mamluk Sultanate, led by Sultan Baybars, who was of Cuman-Kipchak origins, eventually inflicted a crushing defeat to the Mongols in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut, and in 1277 at the Battle of Elbastan. After the division of the Mongol Empire, there were many Cuman-Kipchaks in the territory of the Golden Horde. They eventually assimilated with the Mongols, who even adopted the Cuman-Kipchak language, traits, and customs. For this reason, the Golden Horde is also known as the Kipchak Khanate, and its population, through intermarriage and extensive assimilation, became a new breed of Turco-Mongolic people who adopted Islam in the 13th century. The Cumans would never have a country of their own, but their influence can be felt to this day, as countless cities, towns, and family surnames bear Cuman names, from China all the way to the Balkans. Thank you for watching. We are a brand new channel, so every like and comment matters to us. If you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe and share this video with your friends. And if you want to help us create more documentaries, you can support us on our Patreon page. The link is in the description.